Waheguru Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ki Fateh. My name is Gurinder Singh. I am the host of this podcast. As you can see, that this is a kind of a special podcast, not only because of the topic and not only because of the guests that are joining me this on this one, but also because of the timing. As you can see, that we just released our episode over about the CARE program not too long ago, and we're shortly after releasing this as well. Um, the reasoning for that is because we this episode is going to be highlighting Lalkaar 2022, which is our collegiate conference that we had at the time of recording this a week ago now. And I wanted to try to get those conversations back before we get too away from them in terms of timing. And on top of, I wanted to release this episode so it's still fresh from what we talked about, not too long ago. But like always, thank you for everyone that's showing support on all platforms. If you don't know already, if you're only watching us on one platform, you can find us on YouTube. That's where the video part of this podcast is. So if you want to see the faces of our guests and know their names, I'll let them introduce themselves here in a second. But if you want to see the video version, it's on YouTube. If you want to just watch the audio or listen to the audio version, you can find it on Spotify, Apple, and Google. Just look up Jakara Movement and then podcast or Jakara Movement Chronicles. We did drop a letter, and it's no longer the JMC Chronicles. Just a little bit of rebranding we're doing going forward. But without further ado, I'll let our guests introduce themselves. Starting with Mokum, if you want to introduce yourself, just where you're from and your name, what you're up to these days, that sort of stuff.
Definitely. Waheguru Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ki Fateh, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and get the chance to talk about my experience at Lalkaar. My name is Mokam Singh, as Gurinder mentioned. I'm going to be a junior at Indiana University, studying economics and minoring in history. I'm originally from the Bay Area, California, more specifically like the East Bay Area, closer to San Ramon, Danville, Dublin, that area. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. This summer, I am taking some classes and I'm also working at a startup as well as consulting with another. So just a pretty busy summer, but was really happy to be able to go to Lokar and learn a lot about Core Voices and meet some really cool new people. And I'm excited to share about it today.
Perfect. And I'm ready to this is your second time being on the podcast, but for those who didn't catch the episode before, if you want to introduce yourself again in this episode.
Yeah, Wagijikasa, everyone. First off, thank you, Gurinder, for holding this space and allowing all of us to come together and continue the conversations we had last weekend, I think. And thank you again for having me back on the podcast. My name is Amrit. I'm currently a second year political science student at San Jose. I'm also originally from the Bay Area. Um, and this summer, I am trying to take it easy. I had a very busy year with a lot of projects. But this summer, I'm going to start working on some exciting projects for next year that are actually also with the Jakara movement.
Awesome. And thank you to both of you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know we had all yesterday I was, messaging everyone about figuring out a time that works for everyone. It gets stressful very quickly. And, for me, it's trying to balance everybody. I try to accommodate for everyone. So it was a bit much, but I'm thankful enough that, we figured out a time that worked for at least some people to do it today. And that's also so for this beginning part, it will be Malcolm and Amrit with me, and then halfway through, it will jump cut to myself again, but with a different batch of guests. And so, but the theme of the episode will still be the same. It will be recapping Lakar. I will be with other Lakar participants in the second half, but I just want to say that Lakar is our collegiate conference. Like I said before, Jakara Movement puts on this yearly conference where it's cycled between 5 themes in terms of like what the weekend um, encompasses. This year's was Kaur Voices. How do we kind of center our cores to the center? How do we empower our cores in our community? How do we, take space but also make space, that goes for sings and chorus both. And how do you, and then for the sings it was a kind of a how to be an ally, learning those, hearing stories from what chorus have to go through and kind of like realizing those things and trying to see like, okay, where is there spots where I can step in, where is there times where I can be an ally, where I can be somewhere where I can help things going forward, and not just be like somebody, because if you're just standing on the side, you're just as bad as somebody that physically, or like it's already in those spaces. Mainly like the one example that we kept going over on the weekend was like Twitter. Twitter is something where a lot of people think that just because of hiding behind a like a fake account or whatever, that gives them the liberties to go after anyone and everyone, especially cores and in the Punjabi community. But we'll dive much more into that. That will be our content side of the weekend. But going back in terms of Lalkaar in general, Mokum, if you want to just how did you hear about Lalkaar? How did you get to like basically? How did you get to coming to Lalkaar? Like, were you told by somebody? Did somebody ask you to come?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a funny story actually. So I'm not sure if you guys remember, but the people that I mostly hung out there were two of my friends, Teja and Jujar, who were from Seattle. And so I actually, being from California, I growing up here my whole life, I'd never had any idea that Lokar was a thing. And then one day Teja texted me from Seattle, and he said, "Hey, there's this conference called Lokar that Jakara does in UC Davis. We should go." And I was like, "What? How have I not found out about this? Like how have I not known about this? I'm always on the lookout for like new camps and new opportunities to meet young six." So did some research, found out it was really cool. Found out I knew a bunch of people that go there every year as well. So decided to sign up and decided to go. So it wasn't actually me who found out. I was just told by one of my friends, and probably should have known about it before, but I didn't for whatever reason.
No, that's actually sorry. I didn't see like that's see that for me it was because I was a part of our SHSS, which is our high school campus clubs here through Jakarta, and so that's why I've always been in the loop about like what Lalkar is. This past Lalkar was my fourth Lalkar overall. I went to two as a participant in 18-19, and then 2020 I was I think it was 2020, or I think, yeah, I was a part of one that was online as well, but it was just I was so glad to be back in person, because I feel like those spaces are kind of underrated, especially in like in person. You kind of get to know these stories and you get to hear what everybody's perspectives. I mean, I was a facilitator, and for those who don't know what a facilitator is, so we as like the large group, we have main lectures and a main room where everybody is, but we also get broken off into smaller groups where like groups of like 10 people, where there's workshops and deeper conversations, and allows some people to kind of open up a little bit more. And Amrit, I'm just going to pose the same question to you as well. Like, how did you hear about Lalkar? I know that you were part of SHSS, so I think I kind of know how, but if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about that.
Yeah, my answer is very similar to yours. I was a part of SHSS, and I attended the Nishan conferences, and I just Rodney told me that registration was open, so I signed up. That's kind of how I ended up there. But yeah.
We love our community organizers, right? But so I'm just going back to you. You were a part of Nishan, and what differences do you think there is between Nishan, which is our the high school conference, and then this being our collegiate Lalkar, being the collegiate conference as well, being at both?
Mhm. I was able to attend one in person Nishan and one was online, so I definitely relate to how those two spaces were very different. Personally, as a participant at the online Nishan, it was kind of just like, oh my god, when is this going to end? But it was great content, but still, just being in front of a screen for like that long. Um, I think the conversations we had at Lalkaar were a lot more in depth than they were at Nishan. They definitely stayed with me a lot longer. They were a lot more applicable to the stuff I was already doing, the stuff I was studying. Overall, I think the space of being in Lalkaar, it kind of felt like everyone was here for a purpose, and that purpose was how do we center Kaur Voices rather than at Nishan. At least me or the people I hung out with, it was kind of more like, oh, we get together with our friends once a year and we kind of hang out, we kind of learn some stuff. But it also felt like the conversation was a lot more centered than Nishan was. Nishan oftentimes I felt was just kind of like a mosh posh of like surface level of a bunch of different topics. And then Little God was really the entire group centering one conversation and one topic and figuring out multiple different perspectives and solutions that exist.
Yeah, and welcome you being like a first like time in this space. How is it for you just not only, just being in Lalkaar, but also being in this space that Jakara holds, which is truly special in my eyes, but I'll let you share a little bit about your experiences of being a first time in those spaces.
Yeah, it was definitely nerve-wracking because at times it felt like I had nothing to add to the conversation, but I feel like if Jakara was and the facilitators, huge shout out to y'all, were able to create a safe space where even if you felt like you had nothing to add or you were just kind of reiterating points, everyone had the opportunity and was given the chance to speak out and voice their opinions or their concerns. But again, drastically different focal point than Nishan and Lilka.
And you, Malcolm?
It was quite an experience because I remember when when we first walked in, I think the first word that was used was, "We want this to be a safe space," and that's something that I've heard said I can't even tell you how many different places I've heard the word safe space used, and honestly, it's just become something that's desensitized. Like everyone says the word safe space. Oh yeah, what does that really even mean? It was kind of corny to me at first. I was like, this is a safe space, just like every other safe space that I've been a part of. But then throughout the weekend, I found myself like, actually, wanting to share things that I normally would never share to a sick audience about my journey, about the things that I struggle with, about some of the things that I've gone through. And it was just interesting to reflect on that after the weekend because actually, bearing the brunt of what that safe space really was. So, um, it definitely instilled confidence in human ability to build the safe space when necessary, and kind of re-showed me why that's so important to build. Because we want people to be comfortable sharing the things that they've gone through, so that other people can relate to it and give them advice and just build community with one another. So, great for me in that regard for sure.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you brought up like, the safe space. Those are words, and like, sometimes just saying those words are enough to kind of convey safe space. But it's like, what is the environment? Like, how do you set up the environment to be actually feel like it's a safe environment? You know, in facilitator groups, how are your facilitators creating this, safe environment, this closed, environment where you feel comfortable to share things that you won't, normally share. I know for me, it was a big struggle for me as a participant, a couple of years ago, was to speak kind of personally, like about personal stories, just because I was like, I don't know these strangers that are also in the, like these, some of these people are meeting for the first time in this group. And I don't know if they're gonna, what they're gonna say. Like, are they gonna take my stories and like, go make fun of them or go tell people? But it's just like, that you, once you're in those spaces, you kind of have this sense of trust. And I always felt like that from the beginning, right off the bat, after like my first, conference that I went to, was that there's this already like ground level sense of security. Like I had this, like, for me, it was like I was secured, like nothing I knew was I was gonna be like used against me or anything in that aspect. So for me, I was like always, I try to do that as a facilitator now, is like, how can I convey to all those that are in my group that, you're in a safe space, you're in this space where you can share whatever and anything you want. Um, but we'll go kind of now deeper into like the content side of things in Lalkaar, because we did mention core voices, and I kind of gave a little bit what that also means. But for Amrit, for you, what was one of your biggest takeaways from like the content? Was it something from your workshop, or one of your workshops that you had in the facilitator group? Was it something from like the main lecture? Like what stood up to you the most from like the content side of things that weekend?
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me the most was definitely Dr. Amrit's presentation. I loved learning more about the Ghadar Party and everything that it was, and you know, the woman, which, if I recall correctly, Gulab Kaur and Pratar Kaur Tillam, right? Their influential role in the party and how they continued organizing and how they stood up to gender roles during that time and how they just created this legacy of what it means to be a Sikh woman. And interesting how their story was kind of constantly erased, or like it wasn't as highlighted. That was one of the highlights for me. But overall, I think my biggest takeaway was hearing the stories that were being told during workshops or even during main lecture towards the end of the conference. You kind of you hear these stories all the time, like when I'm talking with my friends or when I'm talking with other women in my family, but to hear them from people I kind of spent only a couple of days from, and to realize really how deep of a problem it is, it was definitely interesting, especially the social media ones, like being stalked while you're going to school or being followed. It was just kind of putting stuff into perspective, because a lot of times all these words, when you're covering so much information in such a short period of times, they all just kind of conflict with one another, and they're all just words and we never really think about it again, how you were saying. But to be able to actually see people stand up and be able to tell their stories, it really kind of put everything into perspective, and everything we've been hearing, it kind of humanized those stories. Like, yeah, we can talk about how like every woman faces it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you ask. Every single woman you've ever probably encountered has horrific stories of what's happened to them and how the patriarchy has affected them. So I think that was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing about that. And there was so much, like you mentioned, there's so much content to pack into one weekend, especially because we only have actually 2 days where there's like actual content happening for 2 days, and like the rest of the time we're kind of it's like Friday, or like the first day is usually everybody getting to wherever we're meeting for the weekend, and then the two middle days this year was Saturday and Sunday, or content days, and the last day is usually focused on like wrapping things up and basically moving on. But Malcolm, I also want to pose the same thing to you. Like, what was your biggest takeaway from the content overall? It can be from like the main lecture, it could be from the a workshop that kind of stood out to you the most.
Yeah. Um, I would say there were two main things that stood out to me from this year. The first one was something that didn't have anything to do with Core Voices, actually. Um, I go to Indiana, like I said, and I'm part of a club at Indiana called TEDx Indiana University. And that's basically a TED affiliated organization. And every year we put on a conference where we invite speakers from around the world to come give TED Talks. Our TED conference for 2022, which is the first in-person one I think in 2 or 3 years, my first year with the organization, um, it was in March, so it was in early March, and I was a curator with TEDx IU. I'm now the director of curation, but back then I was a curator, and my job was to find a speaker and basically bring them to IU, help them curate a TED Talk, and bring their story to IU basically. And so throughout that entire process, I was really, really trying to find a speaker that I resonated with. I talked to probably tens of different people, found people that were really cool, found people that weren't so cool, and it took a while to kind of figure out who I really connected with. But I ended up having a conversation with a woman from India named Navkiran, um, who I was connected with through someone else, and me and Navkiran had an amazing conversation. The first time we ever talked on the phone, we talked for like an hour, and it was in like this January or November or December of 2021. And so, after I heard her story and heard her ability to talk and captivate an audience, I knew that she'd be the right person for the talk. So, for the next couple months, we curated the TED Talk together. And in March, she actually came out to IU and gave that TED Talk, which will now be available for like public consumption pretty soon. As you know, as we go, we cut through all the yellow tape of posting a TED Talk online. But my point in saying that is that one of the speakers at Jakara was Navkiran Nutt, who was the speaker, who was my TED speaker. And I remember after she left TEDx IU, after she left Indiana, she went on like a tour and she went to very many, she went all over the country giving speeches and talks about her experience with the farmers' protest. And I think that Nandeep Singh had said he found out about her at a talk she did at UCLA or something like that. And I remember thinking, like, wow, one little effort, one little conversation like that, me talking to her all, so long ago, can have this, trickle down effect where she does conversations all over the country. Now she's speaking to me again, in June, 3 months later, um, because she came here, for a TED Talk at IU. So it was just crazy to think about that trickle down effect, of one little action, one little conversation on the phone, one little connection, the effect that that can really have on people. Um, that same trickle down effect I definitely felt with the theme of core voices too. I'm going to talk a lot about the stories that we heard, and there's one story I want to share in particular that really kind of made my heart drop. That when I heard it, someone in the big group told a story about when they were 19 and their brother died. Their brother was 2 years older than them, um, and their brother died, and so she came into the house and she found out that her brother had died, and she was grieving. She was very sad, and she's grieving it. And 2 minutes later, when her family showed up to come grieve with them, her dad told her to get in the kitchen and like make ja, after her brother had just died and she was grieving. And when I heard that, I think I was sorry about that. I think I was on my phone, like sending a text or something. But when I heard that, like I stopped sending my text and I kind of just like thought about it for a couple minutes, and I was like, whoa, this is a bigger issue than I realized, because I grew up, in a household where a lot of these issues weren't present, in the same way that they are with many of the people at the conference, because my parents were born here, they grew up here, and so their customs are a little bit different. But hearing that was really striking to me, because I was like, wow, that's really messed up, and that shouldn't be happening. Um, and so, going back to that trickle down effect, like hearing one story like that at one conference, it just takes one person to to realize that this is an issue, have a passion about it, have a vision, and execute something that helps change what women go through. It just takes one person with one vision, and so I would say those two things, and then an overarching theme from those two things is just the fact that like it really just takes one person with a vision and an ability to execute to make some really really cool things happen. I know that was a really long answer, but
No, that's exactly, I agree. The story, I think it was about a little bit, the person was sharing, I forget their name, but they had shared that it was their, I think their father had told their mom to go make job. I think that was the full story, and then she kind of took offense to that, because I think that was kind of the story. I don't, if that person's watching, I don't, we don't mean any disrespect to by mistelling the story, but I think what you're trying to say is like very powerful. And the thing that it only takes one person to kind of step in and be like, hey, like this, or it just takes one person to to kind of make a change, or even start a change, right? Starting something is just as good as being there when something's happening. And I think that is very crucial, and that's something that like a lot of people do take away from these conferences, not just Lalkaar, but also Nishan, which is the high school conference. That you yourself is enough to start change. Like you don't need like an entire you don't need an entire group, or entire section of people behind you, right? Um, but I just wanted to go a little bit next into talking about like inspirations, and this is something from our workshops that we did. I think it was workshop one. But talking about inspirations, who are somebody that like inspires you? Malcolm, we can start with you. That is like a core, like what's your core inspiration? So who did you say in your workshop?
um, so I actually said Navkir Nut as my inspiration, but I'm gonna choose someone else. I think that I've been lucky enough to have a lot of core inspirations. I would say that for me, my Dadiji really stands out. She passed away when I was 11 years old, but she stood out to me because she just loved to sing. And I'm a tabla player. I'm a musician at heart, and whenever I played tabla, It's not that I think of her every time I play tabla, but that musical itch within me, you know, if I haven't played tabla in a couple months because I'm very busy in whatever work I'm doing, right? There's always like a gravitation in me to get back to that. And you know, that just comes from hearing my dadiji sing all the time when I was young. That comes from hearing my mom singing all the time. So I really credit that musical itch that I have, which is, you know, an integral part of who I am, to the women figures in my life for sure. And
And
by the way,
Amrit,
sorry, I last thing to say,
no worries.
it wasn't the male people in my life who would drive me 2 hours on a Monday every week to tabla class all throughout high school. You know, it was always my mom. It was always, you know, maybe a friend's mom who drove me. And so yeah.
No, thank you so much. And it was actually something I wanted to point out was like, in my group that I had in my facilitator group, a lot of I think out of 9 folks, seven of them had a inspiration that was like related to them, and that was kind of something that we wanted to see as a facilitator group and as a pair. Me and my co-facilitator was like, how many folks like will name their family, which has like, it's not a bad thing. We're not like trying to make it to where like it sounds like a bad thing, but we just wanted to see like how many folks can actually, outside of just their like relatives, kind of see like who can inspire them, right? And that doesn't put any pressure on you, Amrit. If you're, if I was gonna ask you right now, who's a core inspiration for you, that doesn't mean you have to kind of like now on the spot think of somebody that's not related to you. But that was something that like it was something that was very apparent to us in our group. But Amrit, who's a core inspiration that you can say the one that you shared in your group, or come up with another one now. But yeah, who inspires you?
Yeah. My facilitator group actually didn't do this exercise.
Oh.
So yeah, don't know what happened there. But I was gonna say someone from my family, but okay. I definitely can second your point though. A lot of times we don't really make an effort to educate ourselves about influential gods in our GOM or outside of our community. But I'll share more about who I was gonna talk about from an inspiration. So there's a lot of strong women in my life, thankfully. Like Mokum had said, my family, patriarchal issues, of course, they're prevalent, but they're not as prevalent, just because my mother was raised here. My father immigrated here very young. But the starting point, I guess you would say, of the strong woman in our family was my BP, who recently passed away. But she was um, she was married off to her husband, didn't have kids for a very long time. There was, back then, like, oh, just marry her husband off. And she kind of stood her ground, and she was always very adamant that, I'm going to have kids or whatever. And she upheld 12 years of abuse and, emotional torment. Thankfully, she did it on kids. And even those kids, she raised her daughters to be very strong. All three of her daughters are educated. They're all college graduates. Back when in India, this was not something that was known. But even now, she made a huge push that all the women in our family need to be educated, which is, how kind of usually the men are educated, the women aren't. It's actually the opposite in my family, not to speak down on the men, but most of the women in my family are very educated, have post-grad degrees even. And she just kind of instilled this thing that you're more than your husband, you're more than your father, you're more than your kids. Like, you're something in the community, you need to do something with that. She was in India during 1984. Her house was often considered a safe haven for the Khatgus, and she was just this motherly figure for them, who would care for them, care for their clothes, make sure they were fed. And even in the States, she would speak at protests, and she was always active. And I think she's one of my main inspirations when it comes to being politically involved and doing something that's larger than yourself, doing something that's larger than your family. And just seeing how her influence way back then kind of passed down to the rest of the women in my family, and how it's passing down to me, and how it's passing down to my younger cousins. I think she's probably one of the biggest influences I have in my life. But there's plenty others. Even outside, I think actually one of my main influences was Mata Lalkaar, which we talked about. during the conference. Just her story, how she was able to leave her family and she made the decision that, I need to do something for my GOM that's bigger than who I am and just the people I'm related to. So I think women that share those stories is also what instilled the need to be politically involved in my community.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for me as well, I mean, even though I had said that, try to think somebody outside of the box, somebody that's not related to us. My biggest inspiration or core inspiration was my grandma as well. And there's a couple of reasons why. It was because, I never had the chance to kind of meet and know my mom's side of my like her parents. So my other set of grandparents, I only had my dad's side, and so that by itself made me very connected with them. And so, and having her, and we were lucky enough to spend some time with her here in America. She came and lived here for a while, for a couple of years, and so much she just inspired me just because of the way she held herself together through so many tough times and all the stories that she had shared. And those stories are not easy to listen to, um, especially during 1984, the leading up to 1984 and the years after as well. Like the amount of stress and pressure that they had to go through is insane. And it just hearing stories from there and seeing how she kind of dealt with those things, and kind of how she not only herself kept herself together, but also kept like the entire family together. Just speaks so much about like um how Gores and our families are usually the rocks of our family. Like I mentioned that, like for myself, like my family, my mom is the rock that holds all of us together as the entire family. So it's always it's something that I wanted to kind of get away from, but the education part is something that Amrit touched upon, and which is something that I also want to talk about a little bit. Is like the education. Like I went to Punjabi school, for a couple of years as a kid, and I didn't really learn about any, Shahid Bibia. It was usually about, the Singhs, which, there's nothing wrong with that. Let me just preference that before somebody wants to, clip this up and send this somewhere. There's nothing wrong with that. But also you have to make space. This is something that, it was a highlight at Lalkaar as well, was you have to make space for those conversations. Alrighty. Sorry for the jump cut there. It's like, so we had just a preference, before we keep moving on. Before we started here, I usually use an account, one of the community organizers for Jakara's account, because they have upgraded to Pro. So I have unlimited muting. But unfortunately they got busy with some stuff, so we weren't able to get onto that account. And I didn't want to, keep you guys waiting for. Did I drop for you guys as well?
Yeah, but you're back now.
Okay, cool. I'm just gonna have to restart from there as well. That was, yeah, it said that I had left for some reason. I was like, okay. Let's see. Let me see if there's a reason why that's happening.
Do you want to stop the recording so you don't have to edit all this?
All right. So I think I've dropped out twice now, but I just wanted to just say that Zoom, we do these on Zoom, so when Zoom drops out, unfortunately there's nothing I can do about it. But from what I was going on about before, it was like my inspiration and not being family related. But we can talk a little bit now about the educational side of things. For Amrit, for you, you already brought it up a little bit, but like challenging, patriarchy. What is that like? I'm hoping your facilitators kind of went over this question, because this was actually something that we were supposed to do. But like, have you ever experienced it yourself? Have you ever seen it happen? And have you ever challenged it, or you ever thought about challenging it? Like, just kind of thinking about those type of things.
Yeah, my facilitators did talk about this, but I've seen the patriarchy show its colors in so many ways. In my family, systematically, I think I talked about it a little bit, but how women are just not giving an equal opportunity. Even if, we get the same interviews, we're judged harshly. We're constantly taught about like, oh, she's going to get pregnant. She's going to drop us for 9 months. Why hire her kind of thing. So I've seen it affect so many lives in small ways, in huge ways as well. But some ways I challenge it is, at least in my home, I try to start the conversation about women's rights and how the patriarchy affects all of us, and how it's not just this just because women can also work, or you allow them to work, whatever that means. That does not mean that you challenge the patriarchy or that the patriarchy doesn't exist anymore. Talking about these issues, and also, at least for my family, it seems like sometimes when I'm talking, I'm just kind of glossed over, like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, or she talks back or whatever. So I've trying to take a stand, doing it myself, just kind of having to get over the pressure of, what would people say, or what's the consequences going to be, and just being like, I need to stand my ground, whatever happens happens kind of thing. Community wise though, I've held a lot of these spaces when I was a part of SHSS, or even I'm trying to in JMC, talking about beauty standards, what those are, how those affect women, talking about women's rights. Having I started this thing called learning circles. That's basically where once a month we get together, we pick a topic, we talk about it. We had a couple on like intersectional feminism, what that means, which is a huge thing, right? It's something unique about the patriarchy and its issues, that it's not just about the fact that we're women, it's about the fact that we're women of color, or it's about the fact that we live in low income societies. Like, even comparing the experiences in America alone, like my experience as a woman of color is very different than a Black woman has in America. Recognizing that privilege that exists within me, and also the discrimination I face. But challenging the patriarchy in other ways, I try to join movements. I try to, support other women that are doing similar work, joining their organizations. Or, and also, sometimes no one's really going to allow you to enter into that space. You kind of have to force your way into it, or like you were talking about, making space. Like, for example, with Napulya Napulange, we tried to get Sings involved. It didn't work out. So we're an entire team just made up of 5 cars from across California, and that kind of just, you need to make that space. No one's going to give it to you. No one's going to allow you to enter into their space. So just kind of forcing your way in, and like I was talking about, holding your ground, not wavering in who you are and what your values are. Did I answer every part of the question?
Yeah, no, no, you answered. I like sometimes when I answer, like, ask these questions, they're just posing questions, but it's just, I think something that you kind of just mentioned about, like, the making space and not being shy from taking that space, because I sometimes feel as though, even this is like, in any space, this doesn't, just happen about this space as well, but like, in a space where there's like older folks and younger folks, like this is an example that I can be, sometimes I'm hesitant to take space that's there already, just because like I started thinking, like, I was like, oh, but will they say, or I might not be old enough, or up there and like respected enough to be in this space to speak. But then I'm just also be like, this space is there for me, like I should be taking this space no matter what. But the self hesitancy, like you just mentioned, is, and not wavering when you see it, is, I think, is very key. And the other part about, like, not, I was, as a podcast host, and as somebody that makes this happen, and gets to, has the freedom of picking guests. I had shared this at Lalkaar as well, but somebody had private messaged me on my Instagram about, why do I have so many core guests, like women on the podcast and the cores. And it was just, I was taken away a little bit, but I also just, like, took a step back and just kind of laughed at it, because I was just like, what went through your mind, kind of, to, like, get to the point where you were typing this message to me, right? And and you thought that I was gonna change, and I don't know I just never understood why, because I was like, this is the only, in my knowledge, this is like one of the only places that kind of gives that space, and I proud myself on that. So I'm just like, why would I go back off of that, right? Doesn't make sense for me to do that. But Mokum, I'm gonna ask you the same question. This is kind of from our facilitator groups from Lalkaar, but like any is there any way, parts or anywhere that you saw or witnessed patriarchy, like in the time, and did you ever challenge it? Did you ever think about challenging it? What kind of stopped you, if you thought about and you didn't? Just basically that's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like I said before, I grew up in a household that was pretty different because my parents were born here and grew up here. And so a lot of our, household roles were a little bit shifted. People kind of did everything around my house. So it wasn't in my family too much, and because of that, I wasn't made aware of it. I heard about it at school, and I saw like women posting about it on Instagram, but it was never something that really affected me directly. Um, one example I can't think of though is that at IU I'm in the business school, and the way that business works, especially these days, is people that are underrepresented get opportunities way easier than people that aren't underrepresented. So in the past, it's been brown people like us who've been those underrepresented communities. Now there's so many of us here that we don't really count anymore as diverse. And so now there's other communities like the Black community or Latino community, and girl and women are one of those communities. And so you see a lot of women getting opportunities, uh, getting these top opportunities, and you might think, well, how is that patriarchy? That's the opposite of patriarchy. We're fixing the system. Um, and while these women are getting these opportunities, which is great, you do hear everyone around the school being like, "Oh, she only got that because she's a woman. Oh, she only got into that company because she's a woman. She only got that connection because she's a woman. She wasn't, she doesn't have anything else going for her." And at a certain point, I think that's kind of unfair because while she might be a woman and while that might have contributed to her getting what she got, that doesn't mean that, she's not equipped for the job. If she wasn't equipped for the job or wasn't ready for the task, they wouldn't have hired her. And so I think that's kind of an example of reverse patriarchy, where there's a system in place to help women kind of elevate a little bit more. That's something that's been, emphasized in the business world, but there's this perception, with everyone else that, not, I don't want to say everyone else, but there's this perception with a lot of other people that, oh, they're just getting it because they're a woman. And so that's something that I think needs to shift if we're going to make progress, because that's just as bad as the examples that we talk about at Lokar, or the examples that we see in our homes, in our schools, in our organizations. And that's something that I thought about when I was at Lokar for sure.
And again, thank you. And I think something that I wanted to kind of say was that I've seen it all. I see it all the time, and the reason why I say I see it all the time is because it's on social media all over the place. And it's the constant policing, the constant bashing on somebody, the constant trying to make somebody feel bad for being some certain way, right? It's almost like some, like, if I've seen it on Twitter so many times, when a Gore does speak out about something, right, she's immediately faced with backlash about, like, oh, you're a woman, you can't talk about this, like, and it's like how it would have to do like something that doesn't have to do with anything with gender related, anything to do with being a single or core, like it has nothing to do with that. However, it becomes like that's where, like, you just want, like, there's this immediate trigger reaction by so many people to just if they see a core, they just like immediately just be like, no, you can't speak. And I personally know some people that are like that, like there's some people that I know at my local gurdwara that I go to that are like that. And it's unfortunate, because those are the type of folks that will never, even if you have a conversation with them, they'll never change their mind, because they're just so set on that being the way that things are. um and even if I do have I had conversations with folks like that before, and it's gone nowhere. And it's just, like we just go in a circle over and over and over again. And at that point, like, I kind of feel like, okay, this is a waste of my time. Right. But that's where we, I still try my hardest to kind of, take up those, like make space, and also by taking space. And, you can take space. That's okay. Like, Malcolm, you just shared, like, taking space doesn't mean that you have to be afraid to do something. Like, it just because you might feel like like people will say this about you or that about you. If you're equipped for it, then why are you holding yourself back? You shouldn't have to like hold yourself back from yourself. But moving on, kind of, I just wanted to kind of, pose the question of like, in terms of the main lectures in, the two lectures, I'll go kind of first about this, because I think the biggest thing that stood out for me was Amrit Didi's lecture. And it's just about like how captivating it was, just not to learn about, the Ghadar party and their history, but also to see like they were actually, it was not just all, things. There were very crucial cores that were also a part of that. And even Amrit Didi, like, even doing her lecture, she was like, some things we don't know about them because it was never documented, or like they're not even in the oral history of things. But I just want to ask you guys, like, from one of the main lectures, this can even go back to Jaskit Didi's lecture as well, from the first day as well. Like from the main lectures, what stood out to you guys the most? Mokum, if you want to go first. This you can pick from any lecture. You can talk about every lecture. Feel free to speak about anything.
Yeah. Um, you know, the biggest thing that I took away from Amrit Banji's lecture, actually wasn't really having to do with Kaur Voices much. Sorry about these notifications. Let me turn on Do Not Disturb. But it wasn't. It didn't have to do with Kaur Voices much as like reinforcing how important it is to learn history. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a history minor, and the reason for that is because I love to learn about what the people of the past did, because what you quickly realize is that patterns of the past always repeat themselves, and we hear that in like movies. We hear like history always repeats itself, but you don't really see that in action and realize how valuable it is to learn about that history until you study it, and so when she was presenting about the Ghadar party, um, and teaching us about that, you just kind of your mind goes to, how can I incorporate some of that spirit that they had, some of those ideas that they had, in solving the problems of today. And I had a couple conversations with some of my friends about those very topics, and it was we had some good ideas for sure. Not sure kind of how many of them are going to go anywhere, but like I said, it's only one idea with one person who has a vision to actually go change something. So I would say that from her, it just reinforced for me how important it was for us to learn our history.
Yeah, and I mean, I take the same takeaway as well. And Amrit, what about you? And you can talk about any of the main lectures. Even our recap lecture at the end as well.
Yeah. I would second your all's thoughts about how important it is to learn your history. I don't remember this exact quote or who said it, but there's so many of them that talk about how a tree can't really grow without its roots, and that's just kind of what I was raised with. That's what I try to implement in my life. I try to learn as much about history as I can, and when you read history, you learn so much about the Singhs that had done so much for their Gom, which again, how you had said it, not trying to belittle those I, I'm losing my words. Not trying to belittle those stories, but you never really hear about the gods. To be able to sit there and listen in depth about Dr. Amrit's presentation about Kartar, Kartalo and Gulab God, it was just kind of refreshing to actually be able to hear the stories of all these revolutionary gods and what they had done for their Gom and everything they stood for. I've had so many conversations with like my father, who's a huge history nerd. He talks about the Ghadar party. We've had extensive conversations about it, but you never heard about the role of women in it. And he's even admitted to me that for some reason, something in his brain switches off when he starts to hear about women or something. It's just kind of like he's wired to neglect any story about a woman. This was years ago. Hopefully he's changed his ways from this, but you know, just it just kind of, I think it talks about why so many, like, from her presentation, I think my biggest takeaway was the fact that I'll never be able to hear so many stories about how many important guards were in our history and all that they did. So although it was very inspiring and it was very enlightening, I think my biggest takeaway was kind of disheartening and kind of pessimistic. It was just like, there are so many guards out there who did so much for their com, did so much for their community, and I'll never get a chance to hear their stories because someone somewhere along the line deemed that because they were a god, their stories weren't important, or that they were shut down. So I kind of, from that, I took the initiative to hear more stories about guards, or to listen about the stories that our grandparents have, and especially the stories of guards about their friends and their mothers and what they were like and what they did. But that was definitely my biggest takeaway from that lecture.
And thank you. And I think that side, that aspect of it, I haven't had kind of thought about until now. And, I just want to thank you for kind of, bringing that up, because I think that's very key as well, because the lack of history is alarming. I think because of the lack of history, for me, like hearing some history kind of made me happy, but also to your point of like, it's so small in comparative, and this is something I can share as well, and this is I don't want to like sound mean or like being a, but like the so when we were in the presentation, I think the first 30-ish minutes of the presentation was talking about like the Ghadar party. I think it might be a little bit more, and we were talking about the Ghadar party, the history, and all the things that were a part of it and all the events. And I kind of like sitting there to myself in my thought ahead. I was like, how are we gonna connect this to the theme that we're talking about, like to this weekend? And sure enough, like as I was thinking that, like the next slide was like transitioning to it. So I was like, oh, we're transitioning to it. But I also, like, in terms of like the spread out of the lecture, majority of like the amount of time spent on the course was like next to nothing in comparison of like the rest of the history, which again, there's multiple reasons why. Amr Didi shared in the presentation itself that there was a lack of history. They haven't been able to obtain enough history to tell these stories a lot more, because there isn't, like, there's not enough story, like they don't know enough of the story, and two, there's not enough of those stories out there. So that's why it's not because like this is how the lecture was set up. This is just the reality of the situation, is that there's a lacking of history. And so that's why I'm ready at that time in her lecture even said, like, if there's one thing she recommends is like, go back to your families, talk to the cores in your family, hear about their history. And so someone is there to record it. Like, even orally listening to those stories, you will store those stories with you, and take away. And so that's something I just wanted to also like leave us on, because I think we've been going on for a bit here now. And we had a couple of technical difficulties. And so, but I hope everything turns out well. And this is just part, like I said, this is going to be part one. This is going to be a long episode. So, if you're listening till up until now, thank you for listening. And you can always take breaks in between listening. You don't have to sit there in one sitting and listen to it all. This episode might get very long, but I just again want to thank you, both of you, for joining me, and taking time out of your guys' schedules, to join and speak about your thoughts, not only about Lalkaar, but also Kaur Voices, and also sharing some personal stuff of your own. But I'll turn it to you, either of you, to, if you guys, I see you guys both unmuted. So if there's anything you guys want to kind of say before we wrap up here, the floor is your guys.
Yeah. Really quickly, before we close off, I just wanted to say, again, stressing how you said how important it is to record our histories. I am currently starting a project with the Napulana Pulange podcast, which is all about hearing and recording the stories of our elders, making sure that it's recorded somewhere for future generations to listen to. Kind of just, I don't know if I can leave my email and like the description.
You can leave
Yeah,
your, so I'll if you give it your, if you just message me your email afterwards, I'll link it in the description of the YouTube video.
yeah.
And then also you can say it out loud now as well. So if anybody's listening, they can jot it down now as well.
Yeah. So this is just like if you're interested in joining, because we're always looking for new people to help us record. And also hopefully we'll be able to release soon. So just kind of looking out for that. But the email is nbnb@gmail.com. And then I'll also message that to you afterwards.
Perfect.
But yeah, I just wanted to kind of shamelessly plug that in. But
Yeah.
just in case someone wanted to get more involved, because I know a lot of times we just don't know that these opportunities exist. But again, thank you, Gurinder, for having me back on, and hosting these amazing spaces. I think you mentioned 17 episodes. That is a huge thing. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Just thank you for hosting this space.
Thank you. And Malcolm, if you have anything, any wrapping up thoughts.
Yeah. I also just wanted to say thank you to you and the Jakara Movement for putting on this amazing event, allowing us to come and meet so many new people and learn so much. Just you guys do amazing work, and I'm really thankful to be a part of it. The last thing I wanted to say was, I just think that, we live in a system, right? The world is a system at the end of the day. And breaking that system is really, really hard. It's not easy. There's tons and tons of examples of corrupt institutions and systems that exist within the world. And, there's tons of people who try to go and change the system, who try to revolt, who try to do everything. But it just doesn't work very often. The prime example of that is when Roe versus Wade was just overturned, like very, very recently. That system, was changed, and then it changed right back. And all the protesting in the world, isn't really didn't do much. And even if we reverse it again, who knows what's going to happen. And so, that sounds pessimistic, but my reason in bringing that up is, rather than trying to change the system, the way I like to think about it is just live outside the system. With Gores, what that means for me is, if since we don't do a good job of recording what Gores have done in our history, Gores, just go trailblaze. Not saying just go trailblaze like it's easy, but do something great. Do something that's so great that no one can bear not to talk about it. That's what I love about Sikhi in general, is that the reason that it stayed alive for so long, despite having such low points, is because we had a community that was so passionate about it, because it was such a great thing. And so I just think that the way that we can fight this is not by fighting the system, because the system is, it's never really going to get changed. The way to fight it is to just beat the system, to be outside of it, for Gores to be leaders in initiatives that change the world, really. And I think, Amrit, what you're doing with the podcast is really cool. I think there was an example of someone at the conference who had their own magazine as well. But having women at the forefront of these initiatives that can really change the world, I think that's the way that we can kind of move forward into the next generation differently. And the biggest thing of that too is just not being afraid to do something huge. There's a million reasons not to do something, but at the end of the day, you kind of just got to go do it. And so those are the thoughts I wanted to leave everyone with, is that to beat this, we just have to do amazing things, and support women in those positions and put them in those positions, if you're a man, to be able to go do those amazing things.
Yeah, and 100%, right? Thank you for both of you guys. Those closing thoughts, that those kind of like lead into the next half of this episode, where we'll be joined by a whole batch of other guests. But I just want to go back and say thank you to both of you for joining. And Amrit, if you want more information about the podcast that she has shared, we also have a whole episode about what they are doing, where Amrit had joined us before and talking about a little bit about their initiative. If you want more information about that, you can go always and listen to that episode as well, or you can always email them and directly and find out more. But like I said, this is just part one. I'll send it to my other self in the future, and he'll take it from here. But yeah, thank you again for listening, and thank you to our guests for this first half. Welcome back, everybody. This is obviously not the same day as the previous part of the recording. I was wearing a different clothing that day. That was also last week as well. But as you can see, we're joined by two new people, which I'll let them introduce themselves here in a bit. But thank you for still listening to the podcast episode. I know this is going to be one of our longest ones that we've ever released, but I think it's very much worth it because this topic and Lalkaar 2022 was very special. And I think it deserves to be one of our longest episodes. And the topic especially deserves to be one of our longer episodes. But yeah, if you're listening to this, thank you still. And I'll let Blossom, if you want to introduce yourself first, just tell the folks who you are and just let us know, how did you come to learn about Lalkaar and how did you end up going there?
Okay, well, I just wanted to say thank you first for having me on the podcast. I'm Blossom, and I've been with Jakara since my senior year of high school. And I'm currently part of JMC at Fresno State, where I obviously attended my first major event with Jakara, which was Lalkaar. And thanks to Jaskeet, who's the Fresno organizer, she told me that I should join and it'll be lots of fun, which was difficult for me to say yes, but I'm so glad that I did due to my summer school. Yeah.
I mean, it's always Lalkaar is always a highlight for so many people in the summertime. I know it's one of my highlights every single summer. When, especially going back in person, the last 2 years where we were online, it wasn't the same. But Kashmir, if you want to, basically the same thing, introduce yourself and kind of give us an insight of to like how you ended up coming to Lalkaar 2022.
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, just wanted to make that sure. Hi everyone, my name is Kashmir. Basically, I've been with Jakara since my freshman year in high school, and I've always heard about Lalkaar over the social media, and I was like, what is this? I want to be part of it, but then, it's only for college students. So as soon as I was a senior in high school, I was like, okay, next year I'm going to be a freshman in college and I am going to join Lalkaar. And I know with the COVID and all that, there wasn't enough going on. So this was, I'm pretty sure I say this for everyone, that this was the best weekend that I had, because I met so many amazing people who shared the similar ideas, and the topic Kaur Voices was itself really big, something that we really needed to talk about. So I just feel like Lalkaar is something that changes your point of view of how you view something.
No, 100%. I think, especially because Lalkaar is, for like you said yourself, collegiate. It's a collegiate conference, so for college folks, so you can get a little bit deeper in your conversations. Because I've been to Nishan as well, which is the high school conference, and there it's a little bit more relaxed conversations. But in this spaces, we do a lot of deeper conversations about deeper topics. Like this year's topic was Kaur Voices. And first of all, what does that mean to people, and how do you actually voice, like how do you empower those voices? It's something that everybody still struggles to this day, and that just doesn't just mean that letting them being equal. This is something we covered at the conference as well. It's like also like equity is just as important of being equal. You can say that you're equal, but what are you doing to actually make that actually a fact, and not just saying that for just to say it, right? And I'm gonna throw it back to you, Kashmir, and just ask you what's one of the takeaways that you had from that can be from the content from any of the days. What was one thing that you took away and you still think about, even if you think back now, what's something that stood out to you from that weekend in terms of the content?
So I remember we did this activity. It was Gurbani di Vyakhya. So I think that was a big takeaway for me, because I always thought that Gurbani, whenever we recited it or find its meaning, it has to be particular, right? It has to be whatever the dictionary says or the Google tells you that is the meaning of it, right? But when I was in the workshops, I know Blossom was with me, we were in the same group. So everyone had their own definitions, their own meaning, right? Whatever they thought the Gurbani said, but it all rolled back to the same idea, So I think that was a big takeaway from me. So like I can just like whenever I'm reading Gurbani off of my phone or I'm sitting at the Gurdwara Sahib, I can just like, see, okay, so it could be anything, whatever. I know like, okay, this word means this word means that. And I can just like join that together and be like, okay, this is what my guru is trying to tell me.
Exactly. And I think the thing that we wanted to say during that workshop as well, because I was a facilitator, was interpretation, because we weren't trying to define it. We had the definitions of like the literal meaning of each word that was in the Gurbani. And what we were doing as a workshop was just trying to take the literal meaning of each word and trying to puzzle piece it together for our own interpretation. The reasoning why we did this was because if you go online, there's a lot of websites out there that genderify the Gurbani that you're like what you're reading. And so we try to, and that was one of the lessons we had behind that workshop, was how can we go about interpreting Gurbani, but not putting genders to specific wording in it. So that was the whole meaning behind it. And I think that's like so key, because in my group as well, so many different people had different interpretations of what the same like line of Gurbani was saying. And it was like nobody was wrong because they were all using the same words. So it was kind of unique to see how many different interpretations we could get from the same lines. And then Blossom, I'm going to ask you the same question that I just asked. Like, what stood out to you from the the content side of things? It could have been a workshop, it could have been a lecture, anything that stood out to you from the content side of that weekend.
Well, I think the first day of the facilitator workshops definitely stood out to me, because that was our chance to finally speak about like the issues we have within our families and in society. So it was amazing because we were having nonstop conversations, especially Kashmir knows, like we were talking and talking and talking. And I'm just grateful that I finally had a safe space to speak and realize that I'm not the only one who goes through these things on a daily basis. Like I related to every single person that was in my group.
Yeah, I know some groups even said that like they didn't get through the entire workshop because of like the conversations that they had as like a group, which is like kind of sucks, because like the workshop's there, we took so much time to learn the workshops, but also like that experience won't get anywhere else. And I can say that as a fact, because I've been a part of those that like that safe space and feeling free to finally speak and say what you really want without any judgment. Because like one of the first things that we say is like, you're in this space, you want to make a safe environment, you don't want to judge anybody, you don't want to bring anybody down, even if you don't agree with somebody, you don't want to just start causing, you don't want to go at somebody, you don't want to start saying that, oh, you're wrong, I'm right, and stuff like that. You listen, and if you have something to say, you rebuttal it, but in a peaceful manner. But thank you, both of you. I didn't even know that both of you guys were in the same group. Like I just found that out now. And that's really funny because I didn't know that at all. And this can actually be a good thing or a bad thing going into this next question. Thinking back to that first workshop, I don't know if your guys as facilitators got this far in the workshop, but one of the things we were talking about in our workshop was about experiencing patriarchy and what that is. Did you guys get to the point where you guys defined what patriarchy was? If so, like, thinking back to what those definition was, have you guys ever seen it? Have you guys experienced it? Might that be in your own family? Might that be outside, like in your friend groups or at, on your campus? Blossom, if you want to start, you can talk about, have you seen patriarchy? Because for me, I didn't really know I knew what the word was. I just didn't know like the literal definition of it until that weekend. And then I was like, so many things make sense now in my head, thinking back to it. Similar, I just wanted to see if the same similar thing was for you as well.
Yeah, same here. I did not know like what the actual definition of patriarchy was. I've always been so confused, but ever since Lalkaar, it makes sense for me too, because I'm the first eldest daughter in the family, like out of all my cousins. So some of my family members were completely disappointed that my mom had a daughter, and they're like, try again. And they had my little sister, and they're like, no, she's a bad omen to the family, like she needs to try again. And my mom said, no, I am not gonna try again. I don't care if it's a boy or a girl, I'm gonna take care of these kids, which I'm really grateful for. Even my dad, like, he's happy to have two daughters, but it was just like the extended family, I don't want to say who specifically, but the extended family and the elder generation were completely not happy. So ever since I've been growing up, I feel like I need to be like the elder son of the family, just like my cousins, and be just as good as them. And I had this anger like when I was younger, and I was never able to speak about it because obviously no one understood and I had no place to speak about it. So I was just really grateful that Lalkaar like gave me this opportunity, and I realized that I'm not alone in this at all.
Yeah, and thank again. I'm just gonna preface this before we continue. Like, thank you guys for if you guys whatever you guys are gonna share, because this takes a lot of confidence, not only to share where we were in Lalkaar, which is a very safe space, because there's usually we're there in person and nothing really gets out, but you guys wanting to join this podcast episode and sharing what you guys feel and sharing a little bit more personal stuff. Like, just want to say thank you for being this, and I also just want to say like, this is one of the reasons why like we started this podcast as a team, was to give this platform to folks that don't have it before. And so that's why I just wanted to preference that before we continue. But Kushmeen, I'm going to ask you the same question about patriarchy. Did you know what that was beforehand? If not, like, did things kind of click into place after learning what the definition was? And did things start to make a little bit more sense about how things are run around you in the world?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go with what Blossom said. I was really usually getting confused between misogyny and patriarchy. So I was like, because there's like so many words, to define the discrimination between genders. So I was always like, but then after the workshops, we got more clarity on the topics and stuff. So, but personally, in my family, like in my close family, I never saw it. My brothers and me, we're all equal, right? My parents divide the work between us equally. They don't see, oh, she's a firstborn and all that, right? So there's nothing like that. But I have seen where in my relatives or like friends or my parents' friend circle, where the men of the family have more power than the women. So men are making all the decisions, and the women are just like following, being like, okay, whatever he says, that's fine. So when I started, when I was at the workshop, I learned the meanings, and so I was like, all those things reeling back, okay, so that's what that man was doing. So the auntie that I know, she was like, but she's just under so much pressure. Okay, so that's what was happening to her, that those are the reasons why she's not able to speak up. And then there's all this rage and anger in there, like, why is this happening? Like, what's even the point, like, because both, because especially in America, both men and women, they both work, right? Both parents are working, they're doing day and night jobs. So why is only the men of the house gets to make the decisions and not the women? So those, I'm still like I'm still like trying to figure out what all those things still mean in our culture. So, but it's just, at this point, it just seems also pointless. Like, why? That's so stupid, like man is making all the decisions, and the woman is just sitting there and like listening to it and being like, okay, moving her head, okay, I agree with you, whether, if it doesn't matter if she agrees or does not agree. So that's it's there. So everyone is still like figuring it out, trying to explore. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah. No, and I agree 100%. And I think, what both of you guys have like said, it's again, to me, it's still, because as a facilitator, I pose the same question to my entire group that of like 8 or 9 folks. And like none of their, like what they all shared was like nothing the same. Like all their experiences were different, but they all had the same like theme or like the same redundancy behind them of not being equal or not being like statusly equal or in positions of, conversations like Kushmin, you just, mentioned, not being able to have a voice in decisions that are being made about the house in total. And you share something that's very actually something that even to this day I know of in my family as well, where like having daughters over and over again is seen like as a bad thing. Like you even said, like your mom was saying, they call it a bad omen. Like she just had, she can't have a son, which I don't understand why. It's very like Kushman, you said, it's very like a weird way of thinking about things. But and then the thing is like when you challenge or you ask why, you're always met with like right? Or like there's no actual reasoning behind it or logical reasoning behind it. It's just a defense mechanism at sometimes. But thank you both for sharing that as well. I just wanted to say, like, I think the same workshop we started off, or your facilitators should have started off, was asking you guys like, who's your guys' core inspiration? I know in our group we had a split of people where I think it was seven folks named their core inspiration to be somebody of their family or somebody that they're related to two people not. And this is not to like, diverge you guys from what you guys are going to say, but I think that's something that was highlighted to me from our workshop. But if you guys wanted to dive into your guys' core inspiration, and then I can piggyback on that, what I want to say after that. Kushmin, if you want to start first, like who's a core that inspires you? It could be anybody that's related to you or outside your relationship, whoever you choose that you want to pick with.
That's actually a very difficult question at this point, because after the weekend, there were a lot of cores coming to my mind, who like, okay, that was also my inspiration. That was also my inspiration. But somebody that I said at the workshop was my Nani ji. She suffered a lot. She's been through a lot, but she stood strong against all those who said anything to her. So she even till today, whenever I talk to her, there's just something about her voice that's always calming and encouraging. So it's like whenever she just like, generally she's talking like, how are you, or how's your day been, or how's your college going, there's just something like so strong in her voice that's just like telling me like, hey, you can do this, like whatever obstacle you have, you can just like go through it, cross over it. So that's why I said like she's one of my inspirations, core inspirations especially. So but there are many other, like my cousins, my mom especially, who's been through a lot, and then all my aunties that I see around me who are struggling or who are teaching at the Punjabi school, they are also my inspiration. And all the facilitators at Jakara Movement, those ladies are my big inspiration, honestly, because I think they're doing an exceptional job, for the community and for the youth.
Yeah. And then Blossom, you as well?
I agree with Kushmin and all the Jakara cores out there. Like, they definitely work hard to make us speak out and use our voices. But personally, my number one core inspiration is my mom, of course, because she's been through a lot. I can't imagine like dealing through that, like personally, because she came to America, married my dad, and like a year later, her mom died. And a couple of years later, her dad died, and she wasn't able to see them. And especially for being the younger like son of the family for my dad, and like the younger side, we really didn't get much compared to the other brothers. So she had to do all the cooking, taking care of all my cousins when we all used to live in the house. She basically babysat everyone, and it was just very difficult for her. Even today, she deals with a lot, but she's a strong woman because she speaks out. Like, even if my grandpa says something, she will speak out without a doubt. And that's what gives me the courage to also use my voice. Even though I do get shut down by some other male family members, I am not afraid. Even if they call me crazy, I'm not afraid.
And it's actually, so I was gonna like so in the first part, somebody had shared saying that, like, speaking out is just like that takes a lot of confidence, because in the back of your head you think like, oh, I'm gonna get shut down or something, someone's gonna say this to me. But like just taking those steps and voicing yourself is very important, and I'm glad that you also brought that up. That's like a running thing that have now both parts have kind of highlighted, is like, even if you think that even if you already know that you're going to get like shut down from somewhere, like still voicing your opinion still matters. Like you just having a voice matters just as much as you shutting yourself down. Like that's the last thing you want to do, is like, without even anybody shutting you down, you shut yourself down. And but I wanted to transition back to this question. I asked this because even thinking back to Amrit Didi's lecture about the Ghadar Party, and at first, we were learning a lot of history about the Ghadar Party, and then at the end, Amrit Didi kind of gave two examples of two corps that were also very, prominent in the movement, but they're not recognized as how the men of the other party are recognized. And I wanted to ask you both of you, of like, why do you guys think that kind of is? Like, what is it that in our community, or just like general wise, why is it that the gores in history kind of get put to the side, and it's the men kind of high? Like, I know we can talk about patriarchy, but like for you, like what is your guys' first impressions about that? Like, why is it that? Blossom, if you want to start, you can start. About like, why is it that the gores in our history, not just those that are related to us, kind of get pushed aside? And that's why I think that it's kind of hard for folks to kind of think of an inspiration that's not somebody related to them, because we've not taught anybody those. That's my take on it personally.
I recently learned a lot about influential corps, so I don't know much about many of, like, I'm still learning, but I feel like back in the day, like when we look at our history, men were usually like the warriors, I guess, and the mothers obviously are taking care of the kids. And it's just, I don't know. I honestly can't have an answer for that.
No, it is a very like difficult question. And for me, it's like I also don't know where to begin, because there is nowhere you can begin. I can just think of like, the only thing I can think of is like every single book, every single like Sunday school, Punjabi school that I went to, or what, there was always stories that highlighted men's stories and journeys. That's why, to me, I've always thought like there just haven't been the sharing of those stories. So nobody's going to be obviously thinking of those folks, because to us, they were never taught. And Kashmir, if you have something, you want to add to that point, going back to like, why do you think that is?
Just what you said about the history of when we study, there's always stories about men. It just came to my mind, like, it can't be that there weren't any rebellious women back in the day. I don't believe that. There has to be at least one, or like at least a group of women who were fighting, and who were like just saying things out, who were shutting people down, and claiming their voices. But we just don't know about them, because nobody writes about them, because like I think it was Professor Amrit that said history is written by men for men. So I think that's where it kind of gets the woman's voice get lost. Even like not just our course, like anywhere in the history we see history books, usually there's a name, it's always a man, right? It's barely a woman or a lady. And the stories are about these soldiers, or the explorers, inventors, discoverers. They're all men. There are women, it's not like there aren't any in science and mathematics, in every field, right? But it's just that we don't know their names, because our thinking is just that, oh, whatever is being taught to us, that is all there is. There's nothing more beyond this. So I think that at that point we just don't search on that topic anymore, or we just don't look for more people, and we don't find more female voices being said in that subject. So, but yeah, it's a very broad topic where we can't really say anything about it, like who knows what happened in the past, right? It's just like whatever is written in the books, we are just saying that. So, and we're still, searching, exploring, and discovering. So I'm hoping there's a whole lot more that we don't know yet, and it's gonna surprise us when we learn more. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that was kind of the point that I wanted to make, because Professor Amrit, they had a presentation, and they said that in the books and all the writing that they had, there was no mention of the two cores that they presented to us that were part of the Ghadar Party and the Government movement. But they said that the way they got to know these scores were through oral history. She talked to, families. She talked to folks that were related or folks that were around the time, or they've heard stories from that time, and that was the only reason why they even know who, those two cores were that they presented to us and shared with us. It was because of the oral history that they had listened to, because there was no books about them, there was no writing about them. And that goes to your point, Kashmir, is like, as we keep going, more of these cores are going to pop up through this oral history, but we have to kind of go out of our way as well to kind of search for those. Like, they're not going to pop up themselves. Like, Professor Amrit, she went out there and she really was looking for these, these two cores, and she was looking for other things. And so that's why, she was able to find them. Us just sitting around is not going to be able to do it. But I just wanted to move on quickly to one of my last questions that I have. Thinking back to the lectures, I know we dove into the workshops a lot. Thinking about the lectures, what was something that kind of stood out to you all, both of you, from either any of the lectures? It could be the first lecture that just Keith Didi did about the history of cores, or kind of giving an overview of the entire thing. It could be with, I think it was Navdeep Banji the second time, the second day, and her, or the last one, of course, was with Professor Amrit. Any of those lectures, like, what's something that stood out to you or kind of like took you by surprise? Because for me, it was like me going to Lalkaar, like hearing those lectures are what kind of make my head kind of, that's what sticks with me the most, because those are like things I've never ever have known about before. This is like my first time knowing about these things. So it was kind of cool for me to realize that there were these two cores that were very fundamental in the Ghadar Party and the Ghadar movement that I had never heard about before. Kashmir, you can start, and just tell us one thing that you took away from any of the lectures, or still something that, like, kind of in the moment you kind of were like, I would want to learn more about that.
So I'm just gonna say all the lectures were really inspiring.
Yes.
So there's nothing like
Yes.
we took away from all the lectures. But
Yes.
yeah, definitely the Professor Amrit, the lecture she gave, it was shocking that we don't know about these people, and these two cores that did so much for the Sikh Qawm, for the community. And I was like, why am I hearing about this right now? Because I grew up listening to the stories of Ghadar Party, the independence of India, and all those stories that our grandparents tell us. So I never came across both of their names. So I'm just there, like, sitting there. Okay, if there's two of these, there has to be more. So it's not possible. Like, there were these two. Who else could be there? That she could be someone's wife, someone's sister, someone's daughter, involved, helping with the movements, and helping, like, preach about the word, and spreading the word about their newspaper, about their movement, about what they're doing. So I think that was a big takeaway, that like you said, sitting up here and it's not going to get anything done. You have to get around, ask questions, make people, like, tell the oral stories, because that's the only thing we have, even though oral stories are something that we say are not credible, because word of mouth changes every time you tell someone something. So, but still, we need to get to the root of it and figure out, like, why is it that why we don't believe oral stories when all of them are originated from the same source?
And you have to start from somewhere. The oral stories are a start. There's probably like that, just to discredit those from right off the bat, that's not fair, because those stories are being told for a reason. Nobody's just making up that story to make it up, you know. And then Blossom, I'm gonna throw the same question to you. Out of any of the lectures that we had at Lalkaar, like what's something that in the moment you kind of were took aback by, or like kind of was like, oh, that took you like a little bit to like realize, or kind of stumped you for a little while? I know for my group, we had a couple folks saying that the first introduction lecture where Jaskeet had, shown a bunch of pictures of different cores that we've never, I know like a couple of people in my group were like, they've never even heard those names. So that was something that like I know I could immediately seen from myself, but also from like other people in my group. But Blossom, just to like, ask you from the lectures, what was something that you took away?
Picking off of Kushmeen, I think Professor Diol's and speech was very interesting because, okay, this is biased, but she was actually my professor this last previous semester. So most of this information that she spoke about at the lecture was actually repetitive, but I'm glad it was, because I got to remember all the stuff that I learned from her previously. And thanks to her, I'm now minoring in Asian American studies. And I'm just surprised on how like she got into this field of like trying to figure out our history just from like all these papers and everything that she found in what, like her basement of her house or something, right? And it's just like, it was so inspiring to me how like she's so dedicated to this work.
No, I agree. Like I think just not I want to just step back and say as well, like her, like Professor Diol Amriti, she herself is a core to inspire from as well. Like what she's doing is not something that's considered normal by our community, right? Diving, like you would think it's a good thing that you find a job that is gonna deep dive into your own history and kind of uncover things that we don't even know about ourselves. But like people are just, like I like she even shared as there as well. Like people were questioning her, like what are you doing? Like like the papers that you just mentioned was they found in this like this room that they broke into finally one day at their house that they had bought, and she found papers that originated back to when the Ghadar Party was active all the way back in like the early 1900s, and mid 1900s as well. But like she found these documents, and even her mom and like was like, oh, and then like, why are you keeping these? But like she really connected with those, and because of her connection to that, she went on to research more, like what are these papers, where are they from? And then she even researched even a step further, and she was like, who else was from around that time? And she, as much as she's found out, she also left off her lecture saying that there's so much more to find, and then she's going to be committed to like finding more. And so that's why I just want to say, as much as her presentation about the two cores that she gave that day was very meaningful, her herself, I don't know, I'm hoping if one day she listens to this or not, but I just want to say, like, you yourself is also like Professor Diol, you're also an inspiration, because I know so many people that I talking to, like I'm like, what's something that you remember from Lalkaar? They're like, that lecture. So that's just that just makes me also think like, okay, that's amazing, because some people are taking something away that was very like a lecture. It was like a 1 hour lecture, and people are taking that to be like the best moment of their weekend. But I just want to kind of start wrapping up a little bit, because we are, because of the first part and the second part, I wish we could keep talking for hours and hours. But I just want to say, like, thank you to both of you for joining again. And I just want to leave the open space a little bit here. If you guys have anything else to say, kind of wrap up thoughts, thank yous to anybody from Lalkaar or anything like that. This is your time. Either of you, if you want to go first, don't just this is your time to kind of say anything you guys want to say.
I feel like I could go first because I know Kushmi has lots to say. But I just want to thank everyone who attended, not only the volunteers, facilitators, but even like the participants. Like, I'm so grateful that I met everyone there. I try to make as many friends as possible. It's just amazing to see a whole new environment from like where I'm from, and just being able to speak out and use your voice without anyone judging you. I'm just really grateful for that.
Thank you for you coming as well and participating as well. Thank you yourself as well. And Kushmin?
Yeah, just what Blossom said. Thank you to everyone, and especially, I know a lot of people have thanked the boys, the men that were at Lalkaar. They were all so supportive, understanding, and yeah, the judgment-free environment that I got to be in for those 4 days. It was amazing, you know, like saying, because I'm a kind of person who says whatever is in her mind and her heart, and I'll just like blabber it out, and then I'll think about it after 2 hours later, being, man, I said that. But that was something I'm like, okay, whatever I said, that was straight out of my heart, and no one is here judging me. And that's true. No one was like, hey, you said that, you shouldn't have said that, you know? So that was something, because that's something that you hear a lot in the outer community, being like, hey, you said that, you shouldn't have said that, you know, that's you hurt someone's feelings and all that. And so it's just that I don't know, there's something about Jakara Movement that's I don't know, that's free, that just makes you like, you know, be like, okay, but this is my moment, these are my people, you know, they understand me and all that. And there's so much more to, there's a lot to say, but again, yeah, but like Blossom said, I have so much to say, but I'm actually just exploring all those questions myself first. So I'm not really sure if I say anything right now, it would be like people, like someone coming back to me and being like, you said that, that's, you know, like it's something that's already written and you shouldn't have said that without, you know, searching it. So because there were some questions I said at Lalkaar at the end of our group presentation about the marriage rituals and the lama and all that. So I'm myself still like looking into answers for it. Still, I talked with my facilitators, and I got like a little bit deep into it, like how all this happens, why all these things happens, the wedding part of our community, of our panth, you know, the Sikh com, how the lama happens, the vyah, the karj and all that, how all these things happen. So I'm still like I'm myself like asking everyone about it, you know, taking people's view in. So I'm not I don't think I'm really willing to like put these things out there yet, but maybe I'm hoping I can get back to you on this.
No, I just want to say, like, it's,
Yeah.
you know, someday if you want to come back, we can revisit this topic, you know, and revisit this moment right here in this particular time period. And we can, you know, once you kind of feel a little bit more comfortable, you know, feel free. Always message me and we can always make it come back happen and have, you know, make it work. But I just want to say, like, highlight what you just said as well. Like, we say a lot of things in the moment at Lalkaar that, you know, we like, you know, why is this, why is this, why, but like, you have to go and kind of find those answers on your own time as well. Like, you can't just throw out the questions and then like think that you like, now you've just thrown out the question and that's it. You need to go looking for these answers. And I'm very happy that you, like Kushmin yourself, you are kind of already starting to think like, okay, where can I kind of find these answers? Who can I talk to kind of find these answers before I go, like, you know, move on? And that's something that I want to pose to, you know, all folks that came to Lalkaar that might be listening to this, is like, you know, do your own research when you go home. Lalkaar doesn't stop that weekend. It does not stop the Monday that we all left or the Sunday if you left early, right? It continues. That is why we're here doing this episode today. Is like Lalkaar still keeps going, even if like the days have ended of the weekend. That conversations, those topics, those themes, those questions that were posed, and you know, you're still thinking about, those still continue to this day. Don't just forget about all of these things. it's on your, like, it's, you take this time of your own to kind of answer some of those questions. Keep thinking about those topics. Share those topics with other folks as well. Take the conversation to folks that weren't at Lalkaar. See what they have to say. See what they have to learn, right? But yeah, I just wanted to leave off with that and just say again that this is one of our longest episodes. So if you're still listening, thank you very much. If you've gotten this far, please, if you're on the YouTube, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It helps us, with support. We can't thank you enough. And last week we released an episode about the CAD program. If you still haven't watched about that, it deals with high schoolers and this program that Jakara launched last year that revolves around drug abuse and drug addiction in high schoolers and also in the Punjabi community. It helps high schoolers kind of get educated and teach others as well. And so if you want more information or that things like that intrigues you, go and listen to that episode. But other than that, I just want to say thank you to you two again. Thank you to all the facilitators, all the volunteers, and the staff for making an amazing weekend for us. That was Lalkaar 2022, and that's basically a wrap on it. With that, I will say, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.